What's good, everybody? We got another round of malicious compliance today. Let's get down. Okay, I promise I won't touch your stuff. Today in study hall, which for those who don't know is just a class you can elect to take where you have an hour and a half just to work on your homework or whatever else you need to do. My dyslexic friend called me over to help him with his homework. Us being friends and all, I said sure and sat down in the desk next to him. I brought my unopened bag of chips with me and started helping him. Maybe after 5 minutes, no, the bag of chips was still unopened. In comes another guy. We'll call him Luke. This was apparently Luke's desk, and he wasn't overly fond of me sitting in it. So, as any normal, kind person would do, he walked up and stole my bag of chips and said, "Either get out of my chair or I'm eating your chips." I figured at this point, seeing as he had already opened them and began to eat masses of them per bite, it wasn't worth it, and I simply replied with, "Whatever, man." He grumbled, then stated, "Okay, but a few rules. Don't touch my stuff." He then set his stuff down on the desk and walked out of the room, presumably heading towards the library. The person sitting to the left of me, not the person I'm helping, grabbed his phone and began typing in passwords. Now, of course, I knew this would very quickly lead to the phone being locked out, and I could have very easily stopped it, but I couldn't touch his stuff. So I sat back and watched as this man, over the course of a half an hour, get his phone locked out for 2 hours. He walked back in, looked at his phone, then back at me, and the conversation went a little like this. "Dude, what the fuck? Why'd you touch my phone?" "I didn't touch your phone at all." Guy sitting next to me. "Nope, it was all me." He smiled upon saying this. The guy sitting next to me despises Luke. "Well, why didn't you stop him?" "I mean, you told me not to touch your stuff, so..." At this point, Luke let out a huff, grabbed his stuff, and moved to the desk across the room, occasionally glaring at me, planning my murder. Y'all ever get locked out of your phones before? Freaking sucks. Looks like all you can do now is dial 911. Sorry, that's not my driveway. You've been very clear. A few years ago, my ex and I rented a one-bedroom house on a dead-end street in the downtown area of the city I grew up in. We had 3 cats, and I lived close enough to my job that I could walk to work every day. The city had, and has, a poor reputation, particularly with regards to heroin overdoses, but none that affected us. The landlord who owned my home had for some reason actually built 2 homes on the same property. Mine, a small 1-bedroom home, sat maybe 6 feet from the street, and my back neighbor's home, a 2-bedroom, was kitty-cornered behind mine. There was a long shared driveway on the left side of the house that ended at her front door. The number for the neighbor's house was 11.5. Mine was 13. From the beginning, we had issues with this neighbor, whom I hereby dub BN for neighbor. Her entire life would fit in the r/entitled thread. She would frequently invite herself over to our house for dinner or drinks. She would have people coming and going loudly at all hours of the night, and frequently had the police at her home to kick out her various boyfriends. By the time we moved out of that house, she had had 2 people actually overdose and die in her home, and had somehow caused an electrical fire in the house that had cost about $35,000 to repair. Keep in mind that this house was maybe 50 feet away from mine, and neither home had particularly thick walls. Mostly, we ignored the neighbor. We didn't spend time with her, we didn't answer the door when she knocked, and we just left her alone. The most we interacted was when I would give her misdelivered mail. We wanted nothing to do with her and the hurricane of chaos that was her life. Of course, neighbor didn't like this. She wanted to be in control of everything on the whole street. The driveway that led up to her front door was large enough to fit 4 cars. A fairly big deal in an area with mostly on-street parking. But neighbor insisted to us when we first moved in that we were not allowed to park in this driveway. The driveway was only for her guests and children and boyfriend of the week. She said many times that she would not allow anyone to block her car in at any time. This driveway was directly on the side of my house. My desk was in our converted dining room that was right next to the driveway. Every morning there was a car parked directly next to these windows. And every morning that car started up, crazy loud because it was a real piece of shit car, at about 6 a.m., right around the time I was sitting down at my desk with coffee. Luckily, I'm a morning person. If I had been asleep during this time, I would have been pissed. I occasionally had family and friends come by and would warn them not to park in the driveway, but a few times they did. My sister was moving at one point and needed to store some things in my basement, but the only entrance was outside on the back of the house. So she pulled up into the driveway and started unloading boxes. Neighbor flew out of her house and flipped out, but my sister has her own anger issues and handled the crazy situation all on her own. Neighbor did this to 2 of my friends, my brother and my mother on separate occasions. She started to flip out on my grandfather once until she saw my mother come up from the trunk of the car with his wheelchair. Neighbor went back into her house this time. My ex and I didn't want to deal with her. We had our own problems and certainly didn't want to get involved with hers. Sure, it means that we couldn't use the side door of our house that led out onto this driveway unless we had 2 hours to get stuck talking to her. But we decided to just adapt. We had some lawn on the other side of our house that was brown and overgrown with poison ivy. We cleaned it out, filled it with gravel, and made it our new parking spot. Voila, crisis averted. Then came winter, a particularly bad winter. We had feet of snow piled up. My ex had gone out and shoveled out our car and a path from our front door to the car. He was out there every hour, cleaning off the path and the car and laying down rock salt. My job was waiting until the last possible second to close, so I wasn't sure if I'd be heading to the office or not. My ex kindly made sure the car was available in case I needed it. Neighbor was pissed. We could hear her in the driveway yelling at the boyfriend of the week to shovel. We could hear her saying all kinds of bad shit about us. And we could hear when she broke her shovel, threw it into the yard, and stormed back into her house. Later that day, a plowing company came. 2 guys dug out the cars, let neighbor move them, and plowed their driveway. They even did their front steps. They were gone in less than an hour. Then the landlord showed up. The landlord never showed up at the property unless there was a big deal. My ex and I were in the kitchen at the time, which was also adjacent to the driveway, and could hear neighbors' loud conversation about how expensive the plowing company was and how much snow there was still in the driveway. It was still snowing. The landlord knocked on our side door. I opened it with a big smile. "Hi landlord, hi neighbor, how are you?" Neighbor shoves a paper at me. It's the invoice from the plowing company. "So I'm sure you noticed that we had to have the driveway professionally plowed? I talked to landlord and you have to pay half of this bill." "Yeah, I'm not going to do that." "It's expensive and landlord says that we can take part of it out of next month's rent." "That's nice, but I'm not paying for that." "You have to." "Actually, I don't. I didn't know you were getting the plow guy and I don't use the driveway." "Landlord, if service is performed on the shared parts of the property, you should split the costs." "See, you have to." My eyes narrow as I turn back to look at her. "You've made it very clear that it's not my driveway. I'm not allowed to park in it. I had to make my own parking space. You can pay for your own driveway." The neighbor was speechless. She had really thought I would have just done what she wanted. "Landlord, you made your own parking space?" "Yes, I've been told since I moved in that I'm not allowed to park in the driveway and I'm not allowed to block her car in at any time. She's yelled at everyone who has come here to visit me that is parked in the driveway, even if they're just stopping by for a few minutes." The neighbor finally looks ready to re-enter the fight, but landlord speaks first. "Thank you, don't panic llama. Enjoy the rest of your night." I smiled at them, closed my door, and locked it. I could hear the neighbor trying to argue with the landlord, and could even hear her walk up and down my steps wanting to knock on my door again, but landlord was firm. She had to pay for the bill herself. And after that, she had to let me park in the driveway too. This lady sounds like a real winner to me. I just don't understand how some people can be so damn entitled. My God. She somewhat got what she deserved with the bill. And she had to let him park in the driveway too, so that's not bad. But this lady's a real piece of work. The HOA doesn't like my project car, so I've decided to park it legally in front of the neighborhood's grand entrance. For context, my family and I recently moved into a rental house while our new house is being built. The rental is in the back of a gated community on a mostly undeveloped street. Yesterday, I received a letter from the Homeowners Association informing me that I'm not in compliance of the strictly enforced by towing restriction, stating that vehicles may not be parked on the street overnight. In the letter, it was a picture of my project car, old BMW, parked beside our house on the street. I decided to look up HOA's restrictions, which I haven't seen them before since I'm a renter, and discovered that I'm living in HOA hell. The street parking rule is just the beginning of a long list of restrictions, including one warranting a hefty fine for leaving the garage door open when not in use. This came as a huge surprise since several of my neighbors have parked their cars on the street without problem since I've lived here, so I assumed it was okay. I can only imagine that they've singled me out because my car is 30 years old. However, in my defense, it's very presentable and by no means junky. Being singled out made me incredibly frustrated to the point where I started doing legal research. It turns out my HOA has every right to tow my project car since it's parked on a private street in the neighborhood. The good news for me is the street just outside of the neighborhood is public and it's 100% legal to park on it for any amount of time. Unfortunately for the HOA, the closest section of public street to my rental house is right in front of their nice gated entrance. Ironically, my old BMW has now become part of their image, and there's nothing they can do about it until I move out in a few months. That's the perfect way to get back at the HOA. I'm sure they'll come up with some way to fine him for that. Them HOAs are ruthless, no doubt. Alright, that's going to do it for today's episode of Malicious Compliance. Subscribe for more, and we'll see you all in the next video. Peace.